I'd like to discuss the issue of race in this case, as well as why it seems to be that pin and that grenade that the media has been exploiting over the last few cases that have come out in Florida.
Well, I think race has been an underlying issue since the inception of this country, as you well know. There's a false perception that since the Civil Rights Act of the 60s that everything has gone back, and more recently it's come up in politics, I think because of the election of our first African-American president, that it's actually being discussed. If you remember, he had to dedicate a separate speech during the campaign for race, and so it kind of has not gone away. It's bubbling up to the surface again, and these type of cases, like we've had in Florida, are precipitating that now. The pin and the grenade, as you say. I think people want to talk about it, but then there is a section of our society that does not want to talk about it. They're ashamed. It makes them uncomfortable to address some of the real facts of American life. And these cases, outside of the cases themselves on the merits and what happened in each individual one, Trayvon Martin and Mr. Davis, it gives a platform for discussion. And a lot of the news outlets and talk shows have done just that. They brought it up to discuss it.
But is it a discussion, or is it an opportunity to create, I think, this sense of you against us, depending on what side is holding the discussion? If there was a real discussion, then wouldn't the media at least provide more of an opportunity to hear about the nuances of a legal case the way you have described it?
Yeah, I agree with you, Carmen. I believe that there's some that don't want to discuss it. They want it just to go away. It's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Everyone knows it's there, but no one wants to talk about it. And you have certain groups in our country that even if you bring up the topic, they claim that you are promoting racial divisiveness in the country. My personal opinion, I think it's always been there, and it's just something you don't talk about. It's like some of the newer trending issues in society today, gay rights. We don't want to talk about that, and until it's brought to the forefront. Race is one of those that makes some people uncomfortable, depending on what side of the fence you're on. And cases like the recent shooting, stand your ground cases that have occurred here in Florida have provided an avenue for people to at least, I'd say, open up the discussion. As you say, I don't know if there's a real meaningful discussion happening. From what I've seen, there's more of a discussion about divisiveness and why are we talking about it,
right,
as opposed to having a more productive conversation about it.
When we were discussing Michael Dunn, and here is a man our age who grew up a certain way, that could have led to the decisions that he made, as well as the way people were brought up can lead the jurors to make the decisions that they make. Shouldn't the discussion be more on those aspects of race as opposed to these knee-jerk reactions and these events, these tragic events that follow?
Well, I think that it should always be the discussion, but as I stated earlier, that's not something that people want to talk about. And I don't know much about Mr. Dunn except for what he was charged with and about this particular case. I don't know anything about his background, where he came from. I know he works in computers. He's an engineer of software or something. That's all I know. And so, but on a more general sense, I can tell you that a person's background, how they were raised, whether African American, Latino, Asian, we have certain perceptions and misconceptions. And my opinion is that it's ignorance. When you're ignorant of the status of another person, the food they eat, how they were brought up, what their culture is, their religion, you pretty much get your direction from movies and the media. And sometimes these movies and media and things, how we see people, we have certain misconceptions. Now, back in the day, I guess when I was growing up, there wasn't really any political incorrect. People said what they wanted to say, and people knew it was a joke, and you took it as that. Today, people are so ultra sensitive about everything on both sides, wherein everything has to be dwindled down to race. But I think that it's time for the discussion, and I think the country would be better for it. And then we need to look at the statistics of these particular cases. In Florida, I mean, I've looked at the national media where the outcry comes out that black boys are being killed. Black boys are being killed every day, unfortunately, many times at the hands of other black boys. And that's unfortunate. And so when you get a case where you don't hear too much about the black boy who's killing the white person, you don't hear that too much. And maybe that's because, I don't know, the black community, when they have a case like this, it's happened so frequently. Now is the time they want to bring it to the forefront. Maybe so. So I'm not saying merit on either side, but statistics are statistics. As I talked to you about the death penalty before, how it's disproportionately used, and minorities are being affected more so. It also brings up another discussion with regard to the justice system. How much justice can you afford? If you have money, you're probably going to do okay with a private attorney
Right.
who has the resources to do what they need to do and has some influence with the prosecutors. And if you don't have money under our system, you can be assigned a public defender, whether federal or state public defender, who are great people, who we say that they work in the trenches every day. They don't get to choose their clients. But they're overworked, and they have short resources, and they handle hundreds of cases. And so the outcomes in our justice system are different proportionally. Minorities suffer a lot, and there are whites, too, who are indigent, that need the services of the public defender and the criminal justice system. But you get different results. And so therefore you ask the question, is there really equal justice under the law, as it says over the top of the Supreme Court in Washington? Is it really equal, or does it depend on your socioeconomic status? Does it depend on if you're up north in New York, as opposed to Georgia or Florida or Alabama or Louisiana? And I think it is, unfortunately, different. Carmen, I can tell you that we have a set of laws here in Florida that are written down in every book in every courtroom and law office, from Pensacola, the Panhandle, all the way down to Key West.
Right.
But I can tell you from my experience in going throughout the state that the same case, you will get different results depending on what community you're in.
But it begs the question when you're talking about every case is unique. I can't imagine why people would assume that it should be uniform when every individual's experiences are absolutely unique. The people that are involved are unique. The manners in which each prosecutor tries the case and each criminal defense attorney defends his client. So when I see that people try and put things into these mass groups, I think it does a disservice to the individual who is living that situation.
Yeah, and for example, in the Dunn case here, Mr. Davis's parents, when they spoke about that and gave their comments after the verdict, they were very concerned about that. They highlighted that this is not cookie cutter. You can't just see black and white. The facts are different in every case, and we can't just jump to conclusions when we see two separate races involved in a criminal case that it has to be based on racism. Unfortunately, there are some African American men who are doing the wrong thing. They're breaking the law. But there are also some whites and Latinos that are doing that as well. And so you're correct in saying that every case is different, and we have to look at them on a fact-by-fact basis. But I think because the country is just yearning to have this discussion, that any time we have a case that even has a perception of some type of racial undertones, you're going to have the outcries that you have. You're going to have the cable news media. You're going to have the news trucks and the newspapers, descending on the courthouse. Part of that is because it's news. Part of that is it's to sell, TV time. You got to get the story. What I find is unfortunate in a case like Trayvon Martin, is that once it's over, it seems to be over. The media moves on to the next story, and that's our news cycle. That's where we live today, the 24-hour news cycle of what's happening next. But I think there should be some platform where we can sit down and have a real discussion regarding race in this country.
My concern is that the people who have the opportunity, the means, and the resources to start these discussions and who have the ear of the rest of the country have an agenda. If you dislike the fact that we have an African American president, then you're going to sway that conversation as to why people of color really shouldn't be, I guess, in prominent positions or what have you, or whatever their agenda is, or feed the fear of people who are not accustomed to knowing people of color. And then you've got the other side who are trying to create some sense of equality for our communities, who are constantly outraged when something doesn't feel as if it was done equally. But in this instance, how can the average individual have a real conversation without having their free or their preconceived notions be pushed to have that conversation?
Well, Carmen, I can tell you that I think that those conversations are actually occurring. I think that on the more grassroots level, people are speaking and learning about one another. One of the greatest petri dishes, if you will, where this occurs is in our universities and our schools. And that's why education is so important, because, for me, that was the first time I really got to experience other cultures and be able to understand that not what I see on TV, every Muslim is not a terrorist. Every Middle Eastern person is not a terrorist. Every Latino didn't jump the border or come over on a boat. Every African American is not, committing crime somewhere. And those are the stories you don't hear about on the media. Those are the everyday people that are living in our communities, that are doing what they can at the grassroots level. But I think it is time for a national discussion with regard to this. I think it'll bring us pretty far, eons far into the future. We've done a lot of work. Martin Luther King, we have a Martin Luther King Day, Black History Month, but I think we have a long way to go with regard to education and understanding of one another, where we come from, what our culture is like, and to kind of peel off the stereotypes. I think then and only then will we learn how to live with each other as Americans.
I've always said that you are in a unique position to speak to this because you are of both races and you have served on both sides of that table in that courtroom. So from your vantage point, what can you add to the discussion that we are not privy to?
I can tell you this from my experience as a former criminal prosecutor down here in Florida, and as a defense attorney, when you have how I see race plays in, not the obvious, jury, juries making a decision based on race, but in the filing process, in the initiating process. Carmen, let's go back to law enforcement. What starts these cases? Young African American men interacting with law enforcement. On every comedy show and movie that there is, that they make it somewhat of a joke. Any comedy show you see, you'll see that about a black man as opposed to a white man being stopped by the police. The different things that you do. The black man knows he has to have his hands up. He's quiet. He's yes, sir, no, sir, because his life could be taken from him. And that's not to say that all law enforcement are like that, but we certainly have those cases that have occurred, particularly with stop and frisk in New York, and the problems of that type of police practice. Whereas when a white man is stopped, he can question the officer. He can step out of the vehicle. He could say, "What is this about? I'm on my way to a function." And without really the fear of being shot and killed unless he reaches for something. And so to answer your question, as an attorney, what I've observed is that there are places where being a prosecutor, where you pull that pen out and decide to sign, a charging document, an indictment, or an information to charge somebody with a crime, is based on your limited knowledge. It's not black and white. It's not in a vacuum. You have to understand, okay, if the victim is black, if the victim is white, what were they thinking? If you really want to investigate the case, okay? And so I found in my experience coming up that you have a lot of young people coming out of law school who are prosecutors who have never interacted with minorities. You have police officers who get out of the academy, they have a gun and a badge, they're in a squad car, and here in Florida, they don't, forget about race, they don't even know about New Yorkers, people from New Jersey, people from Connecticut. They know, a lot of them know only the 3 or 4 counties that are surrounding where they grew up. And so there has to be some type of education wherein we are required to learn about other people, whether it's in the curriculum of our schools, in our police academies, in our courtrooms and law schools where we're training people so that we understand better where other people are coming from. And that's just not black and white. That's Middle Eastern, that's, Latino. Wherever it is, we need to learn about other people if we're going to interact with those people, especially in a public function.
I understand that. So is there anything else that you want to add to the interview?
No, I'm just hoping that as time passes, that we can get out of the political nonsense that goes back and forth. You touched on a little bit about an African-American president. That is a historical event. You may agree or not agree with his policies or his practices, but it's unfortunate. What I've seen is the disrespect for the office of the presidency because there's an African-American in there. There's a delegitimization of this president with the birthers, and he's from Kenya, and he's not the real president. That concerns me because we're going to have a woman president. We're going to have a Latino president. We'll have another African-American president. We may have a Middle Eastern, person of Middle Eastern descent or Asian descent. That's what makes the United States the United States. And I am hopeful that as each generation comes on, there'll be some tolerance where we can talk with each other and sit down and learn about each other. That's my hope for this country.
Well, it's 30 degrees here in New York. We've had 3 snowstorms in the last 8 days. I see you are enjoying the weather.
Well, here in Tampa, Florida today, it's a little chilly. It's about 66 today. So I have to have the long sleeve on. Next week we'll be back to the traditional 80s, and no need for shovels down here, Carmen.
Well, thank you again for having this interview. I think it's very important. I think it helps people understand if they take the time out to listen to a full interview and not 3 30-second sound bites, that it is a very complex issue. It's a very complex situation, and that every single case is indeed unique.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.